This isn't going to be a webinar like most of our webinars. It's not a webinar where we are teaching. This is a webinar to help folks to understand the project that we are going to be starting. And so I'm just going to go ahead and dive in. So if you're here today, hopefully you're here to talk about CCASA's Restorative Justice Project, an informational session about what the project is, about the application. And this is a project that we are able to do because we got a grant from the Restorative Justice Council of Colorado. All right, so today what we're going to do is go over really quickly what is restorative justice. We're going to give you an overview of what the project is. We're going to talk about a timeline for what the project is going to look like. We're going to discuss partnerships within this project format. I'm going to go over the application, which, just to be transparent, isn't 100% complete yet. So there might be some changes in what I show you. And then there's going to be time for questions. So for folks who came in, just to let you know, we are recording. For folks who weren't able to make it, want to make sure that they can access this and understand the project. Okay, so really quickly, I want to go over restorative justice, which could be like a college course, but we don't have time for that today. So I'm just going to talk really quickly about restorative justice is a framework. It's theories, it's practices, right? And one of the things that we've been doing in CCASA is really wanting to emphasize the point that restorative justice isn't just victim offender dialogue. It's not just getting straight to that. There's so much to understand there, and how that works within ourselves and how we change from a punitive mindset of punishment to looking more holistically, comprehensively, coming from a place of understanding, and moving away from punitive mindsets to looking towards restoration and repair. So that's something that we need to do within ourselves as individuals, within our relationships with all the people around us, within agencies, within you know, our structure as a whole. Restorative justice is a response to harm. Harm can look like many different ways. It can be something that someone said that hurt someone else. It could be physical assault. This project specifically is about response to the harm of sexual violence. And when I talk about sexual violence can mean different things. It can mean sexual assault. It can also mean like words that people use that can be sexually harmful. It can be distributing images that are nude without consent. So response to harm is what restorative justice does. And what it does to do, what it's seeking to do is to repair some of the harm that is done. You're never going to repair things to what they were like before that, because we are always changing and evolving as humans. What it seeks to do is kind of restore the harm, not just with the individual, but within the community, because when harm is committed, it's not just done to one human being. There are always other people and there are always communities that are affected. So that's really quick overview of restorative justice. If anyone has anything to edit, to add, to ask, please go ahead and do it. This is very informal, so unmute yourself, throw some stuff in the chat. All right, glad folks are introducing themselves in the chat. I recognize I failed to introduce myself. I feel like I know most of you here, but just in case, my name is Jenna. I use she and her pronouns. I'm the Sexual Response Program Manager with CCASA. And I'm going to be the one who is managing this program with Agatha, who is my supervisor. All right, so to help folks to understand a little bit more about restorative justice, CCASA has started to host a series of restorative justice webinars. So here are some of those webinar links. If you haven't seen them, I'm going to put them into the chat. You can always find them. CCASA has a YouTube channel. So for those of you who are like, I can't get that on the recording, go to YouTube, search for CCASA. And under that, go to CCASA webinars, and you're going to be able to find these webinars under that. That's where you're also going to be able to find this webinar. Okay, so these webinars are going to help you to understand certain facets of theory around restorative justice. So I'm going to give a broad overview of the project to start. This is going to be 100% virtual at this point. I don't think too much should change about this, but when we are meeting with the 4 different communities, doing educational sessions, doing work groups, doing presentations, that is going to be 100% virtual over Zoom. I want to talk a little bit about where this idea came up with. So we applied for this project back in October, was it October of 2020? And we didn't receive it at that point, but when the grant came out again, we wanted to apply, but we had a little bit more time, so we wanted to be more intentional. So some of you who are on this, I called you and I said, hey, can we talk? I want to talk to you. I want to propose to you this idea that we have and get your feedback about if this would be the best way that we could use this funding to support you in exploring restorative justice to address sexual violence. So I had somewhere between 10 and 15 meetings to throw around that idea, get feedback, and develop this project idea. This project is very community focused. So we are selecting 4 different communities to implement their own project. We will never say this is what you have to do. We'll say that, you know, there are certain foundational principles that you must abide by, right? Here at CCASA, we believe that oppression is at the root of sexual violence, and we can't do the work of sexual violence without addressing oppression as a thread through all that we do. Everything has to be survivor-centered. Everything has to be informed by trauma or trauma-informed, right? So similarly, we hold to those values. That being said, every community is different, and at CCASA doing statewide work, we can't tell you what you should do within your community because we don't know your community. We don't necessarily live in your community. So these projects will be defined by the community. So what this does, this project, what it allows 4 communities to do is come together regularly. We'll have 3 educational meetings starting in November, sometime between November and April 2022. I'm going to be very transparent with you that we don't have everything set yet for this project. So we have an idea of when this will happen. So basically the idea is starting in November. So it's September now, starting in November of 2021 will be our first educational session. After that, we'll have a work group session. After that, we'll have another educational session, and it'll be every other month is an educational session, every other month is a work group. The idea is the educational session is to talk about community partnerships, community engagement, community mobilization. So Maria, I'm looking at you right now. Maria Limon is here, and she's one of our consultants.
You know, Jenna, I do have one question. Do the applicants who work with you in this project, do they have to be standing sexual assault programs, or can they be a community group?
Yeah, great question. So we're going to talk about partnerships in a minute.
Gotcha. Thank you.
We want at least one agency to be an agency that addresses sexual violence. The others don't have to address sexual violence directly. Okay. So the educational sessions will be on topics, like I said, engaging with your community, because we think it's so important that this project is not done in isolation, that this project is done really engaging your community on a grassroots level, which is why we're going to have Maria come in and some of our other consultants come in and talk about how to do that. How do we work those relationships? Other educational sessions like Lynn, who's been working in this field for forever. We're going to be talking about what is restorative justice? How could that look? What are different options? What are different tenets of those projects, of those practices? So we'll have those 3 educational sessions. Some of them might be individual consultants. Some consultants might work together on those. And some of them might be more resources that we point you toward. There's also going to be then 3 work groups. So the idea is that there's exploration of what is restorative justice to address sexual violence, but there's also work towards coming up with ideas for what restorative justice could look like within your community. And so that's where the work of the work group comes together, where you are working with the other 3 communities to talk about what are you doing? What are the objectives? What are the tasks to complete your objectives? What are your benchmarks, right? So really coming down to actually planning your project out.
Hey, Jenna, I would also like to add to what you were saying, that there's 2 main goals, right? 2 things that this group need to take in consideration, which is learning and wanting to do restorative justice, especially with the communities, but also the other huge aspect to this is to also think about sexual violence and the intersection of restorative justice with the sexual violence. Those will be the big columns or base work that you need to know and you need to do, because the idea of this, the whole goal of this is to really go to that, because we know the restorative justice is being done in the state, but there's not much work being done at the intersections of restorative justice and sexual violence. So that's really asking for that member, that group, that support group or member group who has been providing services, who has been working with sexual violence survivors. So they bring that lens in.
Thank you, Agata. So important. Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Nicola, and I'm from the 5th Judicial District. And where I struggle is that I have protection orders. So where all this reparation of harm needs to be done, I can't always do it because they're not allowed to talk to each other. So if anybody can speak to that, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for naming that. So I think that one of the things that we're going to look at is who could be potential partners. People from the criminal justice system, from diversion programs, from prosecutor's office can be potential partners. But we also really want you to focus on the community. We recognize that the vast majority, 80% plus of people who experience sexual violence never report to law enforcement. And those who do, most of them don't get to the point where they're engaging with a prosecutor's office or a diversion program, even less a diversion program where excuse me, diversion might, in the very small minuscule cases, be addressing sexual violence in the state of Colorado, right? So I do think that there's a possibility of, for example, a prosecutor office being involved in this project. They can be a potential partner. That is a possibility. And we need to be, the other community partners should be folks from outside the community to be talking about what does healing look like. And it's not, restorative justice doesn't always look like victim, offender, or survivor, or person who experienced harm and person who committed harm, right? There's lots of different ways that restorative justice can look like, where it's maybe just addressing sexual violence and the harm that's done with the survivor in the community, or just addressing the person who caused the harm, right? So projects that your community can choose can look a lot of different ways, right? So I do not expect all 4 of these projects to be like creating victim offender dialogues within their community for sexual violence. I expect that there's going to be more creativity, people going into prisons, people going into jails and working with people who are incarcerated and working with healing. Really, one of my hopes is that we're looking at the root causes of sexual violence. One of the things that I love about restorative justice is that we are looking at comprehensively at the issues. When we're looking at restorative justice, we're looking at the person who committed sexual harm and saying, what took you to the point where you made the choice to harm someone? What are the roots there, right? So looking at roots, you could even be doing things like education around the roots, which could be prevention work. So I'm going to ask folks to get pretty creative too, when thinking about what a project could look like. Lynn wrote, we have at times had protection orders lifted for the purpose of RJ. And when we're talking about the criminal justice, even outside the criminal justice system, for someone to take accountability, there's the fear, oh, I could be prosecuted at some point in the future, right? So that's a common issue that I've heard people bring up when doing restorative justice. And that's something that we can address, right? That's not something that we can't overcome. But great question, thank you for asking it.
I have a question about the work sessions and educational sessions. Are those intended for the entire, like everyone who's involved, or are they intended specifically for like the sexual assault organization that's involved?
Great question. So we're going to have, we ask that there are at least 3 people within your community group, right? So we're going to select 4 different communities, but for just the one community, there have to be at least 3 different agencies, organizations, communities that are somewhere represented. You can have as many people from that community attend. You need at least 1. We have 1 stipend per group as well to support that, which I will get to, right? So doesn't have to be the sexual assault agency that's the one person that's participating. It could be somebody from an immigrant organization. It could be somebody from an organization that works with people who are LGBTQ. Did that answer it? Okay, cool. And by the way, like we've come up with this idea, but it's not like hard and fast. These are things that we can totally talk about, and there's flexibility with the project. It's the first time we've ever done this. And it was, you know, so we want this, the purpose is for this to work for you, not for us. Okay. So there are the 3 work groups, the 3 educational sessions. And then what we would like to do at the end, kind of as a culmination, is we would like each community to do a presentation of where they're at with their project and what their project looks like and where they would like to go with their project to the other 3 communities, the other 3 folks in that group, right? We would then ask that there are other presentations to your larger community, right? So let's say your community was Cortez, Colorado. Okay, so you would then do a presentation with the other 3 communities for this project, and then go to Cortez, call a community meeting, try and recruit folks, talk about this project. So those are the 2 presentations that we're asking would be part of this project.
So the idea will be, sorry, Jenna, the idea will be that those presentations will be your outreach tool. You're going to go out and outreach to the community. You're doing this, you're calling in other members. You're letting the community know that that exists. And also you're asking them, like, we would love for you to participate, be part of this, because this is communally centered, communally oriented, and is for healing for the community as a whole. So those presentations that Jenna is talking about is in other words, your outreach, going out there and creating awareness and figuring out partners that you didn't think about it. And also as you do that, the community will get involved, and that's going to help into the sustainability of that.
Thank you, Agatha. Another facet of this project, the way that we're going to be using these funds, is one-on-one consultation time. So folks from your community, whether that's 1 person or 5 people from the community within those partnerships, you can get one-on-one time with a consultant, with multiple consultants. So that's something that's written into the budget. We originally wrote 1 hour so that each community can get 1 hour a month. But because we're starting later, we have a little bit more wiggle room with the consultation time. So not only do you get to access those folks during the educational sessions and work sessions, but you be able to be like, can I have a 1 hour meeting with Lynn or with Maria or with Strong Oak or Reagan? And I'll also introduce you to the folks who are our current consultants at this time. So we want to recognize that oftentimes when you get grant funded projects, we say, here, take this work on. on top of all the work that you already do. And that's prohibitive for many of us because many of us are already over capacity. So into this grant, we wrote a stipend. And that stipend is $50 per hour for one individual from each of the 4 communities. And you're eligible for the $50 per hour for up to 30 hours. What we ask, we really want you to be engaging with your community. But when we say community, your community could also mean like professional community. But when we say community, we also mean like the faith community. We also mean like the tribal community. We also mean the LGBTQ community, individuals, survivors, leaders within the community, people who are doing grassroots work within your community. So here's what we ask. We encourage you to have this be a community member who is not in a paid position within your partner agency, to be really forging those relationships within your community. And we really want you to focus on forging these relationships with marginalized communities, historically oppressed communities. We know that people who hold these identities are people who experience sexual violence at higher rates, right? We know that not just women experience sexual violence at higher rates, but multiracial women, women of color. We know that people with disabilities, people who are bisexual, people who are trans, and other folks with marginalized experiences experience sexual violence at higher rates. Those are the folks that we need to hear from, because those are the people who are disproportionately impacted by sexual violence, and those are the folks who are less likely to be engaging with the criminal justice system. So that's why and I want to recognize that this might be a challenge for folks. And we are here to support you in building relationships. Hopefully, what we're hoping is that these are relationships that are not new to you.
Also, thinking about the stipend is really, really important. and we have heard this over and over again, right? When we are asking to member agencies or partners to engage with us, we always hear these these communities of color, these underserved communities are always being asked to do work and we're not being paid. We're not paying them. So this stipend is for that. It's really to recognize and to help and highlight, yes, go out and you don't have to engage them for free. We recognize that they're gonna bring a lot to it and they also need to be paid. So that's what we are really saying. Use this for those underserved communities. Please don't use this stipend for somebody who's already being paid. Engage with those community members. You need to hear those voices. You need to hear those real survivors who have gone through that they might have ideas of the way they would have loved to have this experience to go by, right? The way that they did not have these, so they want to come back and say, bring those experiences and say, what about A, B, C, or D that you didn't think about it? We have our members and we know the work, but usually we don't know the experiences, right? I'm not saying that some of us don't have those lived experiences, but you need to hear from those members. So please, please, please use this particular position for that. And we're also Jenna's going to talk about it, we will bring accessibility to the table as well.
Yeah. One of the things I want to recognize is that whereas many of our agencies that do sexual assault work already kind of have a menu of options of what they can offer, people have been handling sexual violence within their own communities, with their own families, figuring it out without the support of nonprofits and without the support of the criminal justice system, right? And they can bring knowledge and skill to how they've handled it within their community, within their experiences. So Chelsea, you asked, can language accommodations be made for work and educational sessions? We have written into the budget for every single session, both ASL interpretation and Spanish interpretation. There's another language, like we definitely have space to accommodate for that. We definitely want you to be engaging with folks so that we can be providing folks who don't speak English or English as their primary language. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about partnerships. we are asking for a minimum of 3 different agencies, entities, communities in your partnerships. One of those is going to be a CCASA member. One of those we ask is a member that addresses sexual violence in some way. The other 2 don't have to be. It doesn't have to be a formal agency. It could be, for example, like I'm friends with somebody who is part of like a punk collective in Boston that did restorative justice for sexual violence. That could be an example of one of the groups that you work with, one of your partnerships. It could be a Black Lives Matter chapter. It could be a Surge chapter. It could be a faith community. I really encourage you to get creative here and think about who are the folks in your community and do a lot of work figuring out, are there folks who are already doing this type of work? Which we know in Colorado, though, that is happening in various places. And we encourage you to come to us to figure out where that is already happening. Lynn, I think, is going to be a huge resource for this. Maria, I think, is also going to be a resource. And we can all work together to help folks to also figure out who your partnerships might be. We really encourage you to have partnerships that represent marginalized communities. So who could be some of these partnerships? Folks who are already doing restorative justice. We want to build a bridge between the sexual violence world and the restorative justice world, but we also really want the community in here as well. So how do you figure out who's doing restorative justice work in your area? So the restorative justice practitioners, you could go to rjcolorado.org. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this in the chat. And it has not only the agencies and organizations that are doing this work, but it also has individual practitioners. You might be looking to work with immigration organizations. You might be working with colleges and universities. There are colleges and universities that are doing RJ work, the School of Mines, for example. Youth-based organizations. When it comes to diversion programs, what I see is there's a lot more of them when it comes to youth. Faith-based organizations or faith-based communities, LGBTQ communities, and other community organizing entities, like I said before, like punk collectives or Black Lives Matters. Okay, you can reach out to us for support in finding partners. Not just us at CCASA, but we're going to leverage our consultants in this as well. Any questions right now about partnerships? All right, so here's our timeline. The application opens today at 3. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been working on the application. I've been working on the the email to send it out with, and I'm still making edits. And some of these edits might come from your questions today. So my goal is 3 p.m. to be able to email that out to everybody. It might be a little bit later, but my hope is for 3 p.m. I'm going to get it to you. I'm going to walk you through the application too. So you have about a month to do this application. So today is September 9th. The application will close October 8th, and I didn't write this in there, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to fix it right now. It's going to be October 8th at 5 p.m. That is on the application already. So notification, we will notify you by October 18th. So there's going to be a pretty quick turnaround time. Anybody who's worked for grants knows that typically you're waiting a very long time to find out after that application is due. That is not going to be true for us. We're going to do it quick, right? So you should hear back by October 18th whether or not you have been selected for this project. And then we're going to start pretty quickly. November, probably early November, I do not have dates for you yet, will be the first educational session. And then this project will go through the end of June 2022. That's when the grant ends. questions about the timeline? All right. All right, so the application is your typical questions that you would have about your agencies, about the different partners involved, you know, who is it, your mission, vision, and values. And then we have a set of narrative questions, and I can show you these. And I'll show you this at the end of I'll show you the application, what it looks like at the end of this. So RJ project, like the first goal is to further understand what restorative justice is, what it can be, what it can look like, what are the frameworks and the tenets, how it can fit into organizational practices and policies, how it can include, for example, working with those who are incarcerated, survivor impact panels, community group conferences, and then building partnerships amongst RJ, or restorative justice practitioners, and sexual violence service providers. So I am just throwing out some ideas of what restorative justice projects can look like. I'm never going to define for you what your project should look like in your community. So we do want to make this as accessible as possible. We're making it virtual. I do want to acknowledge that that's not equally or accessible to everybody. People in certain places have more access to technology as well as internet access. We do have funding for interpretation. ASL and Spanish is what we wrote into the grant, and that's flexible. So whatever accessibility, folks, just let us know and we can work with you. Okay. Depending on what the application says, we may request a meeting with partners, or at least a partner, with follow-up questions. So we just want to put that out there, that that's a possibility that could happen. Okay, so we've got two of our consultants on the call right now. So Lynn Lee and Ria Limon, do you want to mute yourself and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about, you know, the work that you do and who you are?
Lynn, you want to go first?
Okay. Hi, Maria. Yeah, my name is Lynn Lee. I have been working in restorative justice for over 20 years. These days, I spend more of my time working on what I'm calling high impact dialogues. I think people traditionally have called them a victim offender dialogues, but I don't like the labeling language. I think I put that in the chat. So I've been working in Department of Corrections a lot, and then I get some private referrals for that kind of work, and have been doing some work in the field of sex assault and domestic violence. So yeah, I'm really excited about this. I think Jenna's done an amazing job, and I look forward to working with some of you.
Thanks, Lynn.
María del Socorro Limón Castro, a la orden. So I have a lot of experience working in supporting and being a coach to people who are building community responses to address the challenges that they face. And one of the things that got me excited about this is actually a story that happened back in Texas, I want to say maybe 7-8 years ago, where there was a man some parents whose 19-year-old daughter fell in love with a woman. She had a child from a previous relationship, and the parents showed up at the house where their daughter was living with the new girlfriend and the girlfriend's mother, and proceeded to kill the girlfriend and the mother in front of the daughter and the baby. And as a community, we were grappling with what we did and how we responded. And I don't know that we were able to impact the outcome necessarily. We knew that sending these two people into the carceral system was not going to change anything. And we wish that there would have been mechanisms in place for us to rely on to address the deep healing and to have impactful conversations, as you said, Lynn, about what we do about this. So what I bring to you is an enthusiasm for working in community. I bring to you the perspective that none of us are to be shamed for the racist, sexist, misogynistic, transphobic, anti-Jewish stereotypes that have been embedded into our brains. And whereas it is not our fault, we do have a sweet responsibility to ourselves and to our communities to deal with the effects of that so that we can really have the kinds of complicated and creative and even delicious connections that are required to see the change that we want to see in our communities. So that's what I will bring. I'm a really good cheerleader. But thank you. I'm already feeling very humbled. So thank you.
Thank you, Maria. We're really excited to also have Reagan Bird, who spoke at our conference, not this past year, but the previous summer, who's amazing. Also spoke at the Restorative Justice Summit that we had last December. That was last December? Yeah, okay. It's really hard to keep track of time, you know, the last couple years. How many years has it been since the pandemic started? Anyway. And then Strong Oak, who also was at the summit, who does so they've both done restorative justice work within the communities that they're in. Okay, so we're going to do questions, and then we will go to look at the application. Also, the application might bring up questions, but let's open it up.
Jenna, I have a question. A lot of the timeline for the project looks like education and exploration of restorative justice, but then the application questions make it seem like we have to have something a little bit more formulated in our heads about what this looks like. So I'm trying to figure out for the application how specific we have to be about our project when we're still trying to think about what that might even look like in our community.
Yeah, great question. You don't have to have a project at all for the application. What we do ask you to have is partnerships. So that's basically the crux of the application, and then asking you questions around sexual violence, your understanding of restorative justice, and your partnerships. And do you have an idea? You don't have we have no expectation that you're going to have an idea of what you might want to do yet. Some communities might, but that's not at all necessary. All right. Well, folks, feel free to ask questions, but I'm going to go ahead and move us over. Can you all see the screen that is on the application now?
Yes, we can see it, and it looks like Graham had a question, or at least unmuted himself.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I was just curious if you had any specific selling points for RJ for community partners, because doing that kind of outreach, we can try to fully convey everything that we feel is valuable, but have you found anything successful as far as specific points to make?
Anyone who does jump in, I'm going to think about that for a minute.
I'll jump in. One of the things I will say, Graham, is that the important thing is not having a selling point. It's asking your the people that have been working with. Who are those people that you know? They're the underserved communities that you have a relationship with, and asking them what is the work that they're doing to really lift up the voices of those underserved communities, right? That intersectionality. And then the restorative justice, if you really, for me, working restorative justice, meaning working with the community, listen to what the community is telling us, what are their needs, and finding solutions. That is, for me, restorative justice, right? What are their needs? What have they been doing? How can they collaborate? What kind of resources do you have in your agency? What kind of resources do they have at the churches, at their immigrant community, immigrant centers or even neighborhoods, right? Because like what Jenna said, we want you to be creative. It might not be the whole entire county that you're working in, but maybe be a specific neighborhood. They're really, that they have a church and they're doing a lot of social justice, community justice oriented work, bringing it in. How will they like to really amplify the work that they're doing, right? How do you want your neighborhood to work with incidents like what Maria shared with us, right? Maria Limon shared the story. How do they see it? What can we do? What other people can we bring into this neighborhood thought and expand it? That's what Jenna is saying. Let's be creative, right? Let's go in. So there's not a selling point. It's more like asking them what they're doing and how they will like to really amplify that and moving forward. Be creative. You're going to get those sessions. They're going to help you to understand restorative justice more and navigate the ways and come together as a group with some project that you want to work with. I hope that answered that question. Jenna, jump in if you.
I had a comment to add, Agueda, con permiso. I think rather than thinking, well, I'm not even going to say that. I think engaging people in a process of discovery, I think, is really appealing. And in working with partnerships with people who you already know and posing questions and open-ended questions that will give you information about the perspectives that they already hold, I think is a way to engage in that dialogue. I understand that you're wanting to find a way to interest people. That totally makes sense. And I think one approach that I have used would be to ask those open-ended questions and saying, what is sexual violence looking like these days during the pandemic? What have you noticed? And then listening. And I think at that point, you're going to find places of agreement, and you would be able to then offer the bits of restorative justice theory that you do understand up to this point and say, I think we can engage in this kind of process because what we know is happening right now, it's not working. It's not preventing anything. We're still seeing the devastation. And I think thinking about an approach rather than talking points and relying on the strength of your relationships with people is a way to get in there with folks. I hope that helped.
Thanks, Maria and Agueda. Yes. Another way to think about this is like an opportunity. I think many of us are kind of siloed, and it's hard because we're kind of stuck in what we're doing every day. And it's hard to step away from what we're doing to get creative and to get outside of the menu of options that we're used to. So this is an opportunity to intentionally take a step away from what we've been doing, re-envision the way that we could address sexual violence with our community, to work towards rebuilding, to restoring, to coming together as a community, to work towards transformation, right? To getting to those root causes and transforming our society rather than band-aids, like solutions. So I think really posing it as an opportunity to take a step back together as a community from just like the wheel that we're constantly stuck in. I'm not saying that everyone's always stuck in a wheel. I think it's pretty easy to get stuck in this wheel though, you know what I mean?
I decorated my wheel quite nicely. Thank you, Jenna.
Any other questions before we dive into the application? Okay. So here's what we've got. This is basically just a narrative of everything we went over. And this is about partnerships. This is the deadline, just right in your face. So when we're asking that there's a CCASA member agency, they don't have to be the lead agency, right? They could just be an agency. if there's an agency on here who's not a CCASA member and you think another agency was doing this work, or not an agency, but a community, they can then like go up to, they can then contact a CCASA agency and say, we would really like to do this. Would you like to be involved? What we want to see is that there's at least one agency that does sexual violence work as the core of what they do. That is an essential, as Agata was saying, this is the intersection of RJ and restorative justice with the community kind of as the thing that's just bringing it all together. So we've got all the basic stuff that you would expect someone to ask you for information, as well as the mission, vision, and values of the agency, community, organization. Maria? No, okay. So basically, we're asking that there be at least 3 agencies, and then we've got 2 others, assuming that you might have 5. If you have more, let us know. We can add more to your application. You don't have to know who the person is who's going to get a stipend in your agency, so this is optional. If you do know who that is, you can go ahead and put that down, that information down in the stipend section. Here are the narrative questions. The first one is we want to hear about your partnerships. Are these new partnerships? How long have you had a relationship with your partners, and how have you engaged in collaboration previously? How do your partnerships collaborate to engage marginalized populations? And how do your mission, vision, and values overlap? Questions on that? I assume that some of these partnerships will be things that exist, partnerships that exist, some might be new. Please describe your understanding of restorative justice. Doesn't have to be nuanced, you don't have to have a definition, that's not what we're looking here. There's a reason that you're applying for this. What are your thoughts around restorative justice? Doesn't have to be anything fancy. 3, why do you want to work towards implementing a restorative justice project in your community? How would you rate the readiness of the partner agencies for doing restorative justice work? And then your larger community. Number 4, how does anti-oppression work fit into the existing work that you do to address sexual violence? And how do you see it being integrated into the restorative justice work you plan to develop through this project? If you've done work with CCASA, you know that restorative justice is something, or I'm sorry, that oppression is something that we have to address in everything that we do. And then please describe how your agency addresses sexual violence. And so we're still trying to figure this out, whether every single partner agency has to answer these or whether we want you to answer these as a group. But we want to make sure that these are questions that are answered, that we understand by all partners where you're at with all of these questions. So this is the application. Questions about the narrative, questions about any of this.
So do each of the member organizations have to fill this out separately? I guess I'm a little bit confused. Like, do we send them the application and they do their part of it? Or are we all completing it together?
I believe that's a conversation that Agata and I had around 7:30 this morning. And don't have an answer for you yet, Chelsea. But we will make it clear, hopefully by 3 o'clock today. Initially, the idea is that there's one application that's filled out after a conversation happens with all the partners. And we're revisiting that because we want to make sure that we hear the voice of every single agency. So we're trying to figure that out.
So one of the things that we talk about, like Jenna said this morning, is it can be a conversation that you all have as you go through it, and then together everybody puts a little bit of the thoughts together. So you go through it together, which also will help into getting that collaborative aspect to it, right? Which we want to really highlight. The other part of it is that it could be a conversation that the person who's going to fill out the application has with all the members. And then it will help them to realize one of the things that is important that we have found out is that not every agency is ready to even have a simple conversation about what sexual violence is. We have, we as CCASA have gone to agencies that we think they are already doing the work, they're doing the sexual violence work. What we know is that most agencies that provide services for domestic violence and sexual assault have extensive experience with domestic violence. 80–90% of the work is oriented to that. And it's very hard and difficult for them to engage in sexual violence. That's a different way to approach it. And they don't even feel comfortable sometimes. That's what we have found out even with our own members. So we want you that you're going to engage with these collaborative effort to at least know where is that partner that you're engaging with in that spectrum. Are they even ready? Do they even want to talk about sexual violence, right? So it's going to give you, whoever is going to apply, you as a CCASA member, whoever it is, the opportunity to have that conversation and through answering these questions, you're going to evaluate who are you partnering with? Are we really ready for this? So that's why we were putting that question in there, Jenna and I talking this morning. But again, the way that you want to answer is going to depend on you as talking to the group. Who are you partners? How do you want to tackle this work? Do we want to do it individually and then we come and do a collective, put it together? It's your choice.
So in those last two questions, just because it sounds like you guys are going back and forth between whether or not each agency fills it out or just one, we're in a rural community. And I think like their answer of how do they address sexual violence is they send them to our agency. They don't personally address it. And I'm just worried if that's going to freak them out a little bit, like that they feel like they're going to have to be getting outside their mission or, and so I'm just any thoughts if you guys do end up saying that each agency should fill it out, if you can just give us some thoughts of like how to portray that to the other agencies to make sure it doesn't freak them out, because we already have some committed groups that want to apply with us, but I know that they see it more as assisting us versus them taking on the RJ or taking on sexual violence services or things like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that every community and how they divide up the work is going to be unique, and we don't have an expectation of how that should look. So I think Agata and I will go back after this, and we knew that this could change the application, the questions that you asked. We knew that that was a very strong possibility. So Agata and I will go back, and I mean, I'm leaning towards just one agency answers these questions. And like that way it will, like Agata was saying, will give you the opportunity to collaboratively talk about how you answer this. And maybe like you'd say like advocates of Routt County, addresses sexual violence in this way. Oftentimes, like we get referrals, like, and then another agency says like, oh, when we hear that, we refer to advocates of Routt County, we might hear from some communities that like, we don't refer out. We like to handle things within our community. So that could be that's something that we want to hear, and no matter how amazing an advocacy agency might be, going outside of your community sometimes just isn't right for specific people or communities. And so like we just kind of want to hear the reality of what people are experiencing within their community, there being no necessarily right or wrong. I don't think I necessarily answered your question there.
No, I think that does help, because I mean, you are right, like we don't even get called on everybody, right? Like sometimes they're just keeping it within their community or within whatever. I just, like I'm just thinking specifically with one nonprofit agency that I think will likely be doing this with us. I think they'll just read that in a very specific way, but we can help, just having this feedback can even help us describe to them what that actual question is versus like what sexual violence services are you offering? Because that doesn't seem like your intent hearing from you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And we encourage you to email this recording out to other people if they have the capacity to watch this and the interest, other potential partners or people who want to partner with you. Email this. Once Maria helps me with getting it on YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, I had a thought. I can imagine the kinds of conversations that filling out the application could initiate. And having been a part of those conversations, sometimes I wish I would have recorded them and submitted the recording of the conversation as part of the application, because there's a depth there and a richness to the dialogue that I don't know how to convey sometimes in an application narrative. This is totally off the wall, but would you be open to, you know, a recorded version without faces? You know, there's ways that we can set up short videos or something so that you could hear directly from these, from the partners. And I'm also thinking about the people who may or may not be adept at using these formats. And if we're looking for folks who are outside of the margins, I have a friend who is brilliant in so many ways, and I cannot get her to figure out how to access her applications on the phone. I mean, it is, I cannot tell you how hard it's been. And this is somebody who knows generally, who has some experience. So that's one thought that I had. And then the other question that I had was related to whether or not the partners who get the stipend have to be documented. Can they be undocumented residents and community members?
Do you want to handle that question?
Sure. As far as I understand, my understanding is the stipend. So when we have worked with federal and state money, the question is not about being documented or not. It's about have they even worked or have they been prohibited before. This is a different grant that we're using from the state, but I don't think when we asked about the grant and we were searching for that, there was nothing in what I have read that has said this is not, you cannot work with an undocumented person. And actually, you know, the whole idea is for people to go out and engage the communities. We know that here in Colorado, you have so many immigrant communities. I'm not talking just Latinos. I'm talking Somali. I'm talking Vietnamese. I'm talking about Arabic. There's a huge variety of communities here. So no, my first answer to you will be yes, engage with them. There is nothing to say that you cannot work with them. We are
Okay.
even for engaging with people who have been encouraged, you know, the traditionally that have been the people that are like, they cannot even work with this because they cannot get paid. But for sure, we will encourage all of that. And I will to reach out to find out if I missed anything, but I would say, no, go ahead, go for it.
Okay. Vale, gracias.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to respond to the other part of your question, I do think that we can put a note saying that if there's any supplemental material that you would like to present, anybody is welcome to submit like supplemental material to your application to just, you know, and if also like access, if you have any issues with access, if this is not a application that's friendly towards you in some way, shape, or form, contact us and we can work with each individual agency, community that and whatever their needs are, we can, you know, that's our job.
That's what Jenna has said from the beginning. Any kind of questions, anything that comes to mind, just if you really want to do these, reach out to us. We will work with you. We will help out in any shape, way, or form that we can to make sure that your community has an opportunity. We do know that this is limited to 4 groups. So yeah, we can only do it as we can in that aspect. But yeah, think about it, help ask questions. Don't stop just because you have a question or you are not sure about something and then you're not going to apply just because that. Please apply. And going back to those questions, I think, Lizzo, one of the things that like what Jenna and I were talking about is not about really having a barrier. It's more like that those questions to help the group to get opportunity to talk about things that they might not even thought about it, right? Especially because we know that talking about sexual violence is not easy. It's not even easy for us, right? Personal lives, like I can share that it's hard for me to talk to my grandma about what I do. What do you do, Niña? I work with survivors, grandma, but because she's 90 years old, if I start telling her about restorative, just gonna say to me, what, how do you eat that thing, right? So we know that it's really hard for some of us. So just opens conversation, that's what it is. It's not right or wrong answer.
In looking at the application, I know you're asking about the mission. The one thought that I would have, if I would be working with folks who were engaging in this process, I would want to know, what is your wildest dream for your community? And how does restorative justice fit into that? You're asking for a fair amount of creativity, right? And it totally makes sense that we engage that part of our minds. And it would be so cool to begin that engaging that part of our minds in the application. I would want, what is your wildest dream for your community? What is the difference that you want to make? I know a mission statement can address that. And I don't know that mission statements that are developed by organizations maybe 4 or 5 years prior are going to be able to offer you the vibrancy of perspective that you're looking for in the application. So that was a side thought that I had, because it's something that I would want to know. ¿Qué te motiva? What's motivating you? Is there a story in your community that happened that has got you thinking about this? And I think that will give you, as the agency reviewing the applications, it'll give you some perspective about what is lighting the applicant's fire. Maybe that's just because I've been reading Eduardo Galeano, who was an amazing poet and thinker, because he's got me thinking in these other ways too. But I would offer that as an addition or a lens through which you can read the applications.
Yeah, like Maria, our Maria says, what is your why? What's making you go?
Any other questions, feedback? Comment? Great. Well, thank you all for your contribution today and helping us to think through this too. First time we're doing this project, we're going to learn so much. We are hoping to be able to get this to you by 3, if not by 3, definitely by tomorrow morning, so that you can get started on your application. We tried to get the announcement out so that people could start talking with potential partners earlier. And yeah, don't be a stranger. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please contact me. You can contact Agata as well. And we're going to be meeting with Maria and Lynn and the other 2 consultants as well to get started on our project. So we're super excited to see your applications. So yeah, thanks for being here, for asking these questions. Hopefully get this out to you soon. Webinar. You can send it out to partners and other folks can listen. All right, take care. Have a good day.